There are a number of people to be thanked. George will speak to you shortly. He has spoken to David Moffat, to the NRL. Again, we will be working with these people, so let's get over it, however justified your anger may be. I'd like now to introduce Steve McDermott from the South Sydney Board, who has some very important thank yous. Steve?
On behalf of the South Sydney Football Club Board of Directors, I have been asked to present this prepared statement. This statement was prepared regardless of the outcome of our court case. There are a number of formal thank yous that need to be said today. The list of individual people who have stuck with this club through its most harrowing period in its 90-year existence is monumental. To try and name every person would probably take a day and a half, and ultimately we would not forgive ourselves if we missed thanking any one of these people. So to everyone here today, and those of our supporters over the past 90 years that are no longer with us, and our supporters that will be with us for the next 90 years and beyond, all that can be said is 3 cheers for George.
Brings back a lot of memories. A lot of wonderful memories that that you tend to forget about. That day was a monumental day for all of the South supporters. It invoked so much passion, so much joy. It's hard for the younger people today to realise what it meant for us to be reinstated and how hard so many people fought for that reinstatement. So, yeah, it was a very, very special day.
South's President George Piggins intends to continue his fight against the NRL and News Limited.
And then you subpoena them, and then you get them to open the books and you see who's been fair dinkum.
One of the most famous clubs of all, South Sydney. 20 premierships in a battle for survival.
We're not going to go on. We're going to ride this storm and we're together.
I was born on Botany Road, so I didn't have any alternative but to be a South Sydney supporter. I was born with one red eye and one green eye. My grandfather, Teddy McDermott, was a foundation member of the club. My father, also a Ted, was a mad South man. He had it drummed into him at a very early age, so the McDermott family goes back a long way with the Rabbitohs. I think it was about 1978 I was approached to look at sponsoring the club, and I was in a fortunate situation for the company that I was working for at the time, where it just happened that I could do something. So being a sponsor, you get to know people in the club, you get to meet different people, and I was fortunate enough to meet the board guys back then. Terry Parker, I think, was our general manager at the club. So you became more aware of what was going on in the organisation. And I was asked in very early 1980s, we formed a marketing committee, which was unheard of back in a football club back in those days. I was lucky enough to be on that marketing committee. So we came up with some marketing strategies and worked out ways that we could try and raise some funds for the club to be more successfully financially.
Martin and I, our involvement goes back to early 90s, 93, 94. And we were on the marketing committee with Nick Greiner and Steve McDermott, and I came on board as a sponsor because at the time I was marketing director of Flag Hotels, and we recognised then that Souths was a terrific organisation to get involved with. So right through that period we were able to live it from the inside and the outside, and we just felt we had to do something, Martin, Steve and myself, and fortunately we did.
Souths have been in trouble on and off for much of the 70s, and it kind of stabilised a bit in the 80s, and then it started going pear-shaped pretty much after we won the minor premiership in 89.
Since the code's inception, Souths have won a record 20 premierships.
South Sydney is in, I'll tell you who it is in a minute. Andrews has got the try.
And Martin is in the daylight. Martin will score, and that's the score, and then he does.
He gets it on to Moore. Throws a dummy. Moore will stride through. Good try.
Souths have got a touch on it. Now it's come back for 6 more. Russell, he's put one round the corner.
This is the last. Baisari will probably go to the air, forget about it. Away now for Matthew Johns, his brother Andrew, and now Harrigan. Big gets a pass away. Did I say Menzies hadn't got him under spoils? Salvatore's heading for the corner. Big Sal.
You've managed to draw, but it appeared you were going down the gurgler.
South had no defence. And as the mistakes continued, the frustration came out swinging.
Now there's a fight in back play. There'd always been some trouble around Souths in terms of its ability to look after itself.
Good afternoon. At last, we're just a few minutes away from knowing the immediate and hopefully long-term future of rugby league. Justice Burchett will give his decision after 4 months of complex legal hearings involving the game's traditional custodian, the Australian Rugby League, and its challenger, the Rebel Super League, backed by Rupert Murdoch's News Limited. Super League plan to go ahead with their 10-team competition beginning next week. The ARL have 2 plans: a 20-team competition should they win the court case. If not, a 12-team premiership.
We know it's going to be good for rugby league, not just a few clubs, for rugby league. And that's going to be the
all right, so what you're virtually saying is there's no hope of the two getting together. There's going to be 2 separate competitions when Super League starts, whether that be next year or
we're going to have a Super League competition.
It does look like the ARL may have won this round. If it's not a final round, I don't think it is. They may well have won it. But I do, from what Peter's just said there, my own view is that Super League still have the door open to get underway in some form.
You have the NFL in the United States, you have the soccer in the UK. It would be a nice trifecta to have the rugby league.
It'd be great. Maybe we'll come back to rugby league one day soon. Or later. We'll see.
Rupert Murdoch and Kerry Packer were vying to see which teams in rugby league would go with them. And Kerry had a soft spot for Souths. In the Alan Jones period a bit later, Kerry I think gave about $680,000 to Souths when Souths were in that period when they had no money, and so although he officially was an East supporter, I think he had he told me he had a soft spot for Souths, or Souths were the real thing. And so he, as I understand it, had a handshake with George and said that no matter what happened, that if George went with him, that he'd stay with George. And I don't think that was the case.
The competition was split in 1997, with 10 clubs in the Super League and 12 in the ARL. This lasted for only 1 season, as crowd numbers and TV ratings plummeted. Both sides realised splitting the code would destroy the game.
Kerry Packer once told me that James Packer was running the Super League business side for him, and James said to him, "You want the good news or the bad news?" And Kerry said, "Give me the good news." And he said, "Well, the good news is that Super League and this war, this rugby league war, has cost Murdoch $200 million. And Kerry said to James, "So what's the bad news?" And he said, "The bad news is that we've lost 20 million. And Kerry said, "Time to finish." And I think the 2 moguls decided then that they should stop the war and come back together. When they started to eliminate clubs, Souths, for some extraordinary reason, were targeted.
Just remember that the players are being very well paid today. It's not a sport anymore, it's a huge business. And I think that's also one of the crux of the matter, is that the players are being very well paid. And of course, not only do they want what's best for the game, but I'm sure that they want what's best for themselves as well. So it's probably a two-edged sword in that regard. But look, I honestly believe that 20 teams are far too many in the rugby league competition at the moment. And I think if we can get to a situation where there's 12 or 14 in a couple of years' time, I think everybody would be happy.
The clubs have been the masters of their own destiny for the last 2 years. We outlined very early on what the criteria is.
There are a whole bunch of criteria. It was to do with juniors. It was to do with you had to have a base amount of funding. You had to be in profit, which is really interesting because at least two of the clubs that News Limited put forward by their own projections weren't going to be in profit. But anyway, let's not go there.
Criteria that was based on club profitability, sponsorship, competition points and crowd numbers.
We didn't play in front of big crowds. I still remember when I was first at the Rabbitohs, one of my first video sessions was in the boardroom at Redfern Oval, and we're watching the game, and every time I touched the ball there was this screaming on the that you could hear on the video, go Craigie, tackle him. I'm sitting at the back like this, and the boys are going, geez, that woman sounds like she likes you. We got a fan out there, and I'm like, yeah, it's my mum. So, in the whole stadium, we'd have like 2,000 or 3,000 people watching us, and you could hear my mum on the video session come Monday, Tuesday. So.
It was a set of criteria designed to favour clubs that were the new clubs. So profit, News Limited, who were setting up the criteria, were guaranteeing the profit of the clubs they wanted to bring in, and they wanted to bring them in because they were outside of Sydney, which meant that the only way fans could watch their teams play these clubs was for it to be televised. It was about driving audiences to pay TV. It was a business thing. It had nothing actually to do with rugby league. Just rugby league was the thing to drive that business. When you actually looked at what was going on, the fix was in.
With the new criteria the league, the NRL's established, we were going to need a lot more money. We were falling a long way from the mark.
Souths were very, very hard on not joining Super League. And George and the board then protested heavily against it, thought it was the wrong move, and stuck hard with the NRL, or the New South Wales Rugby League was called then. And I think not only with Souths, but a number of clubs that stuck hard and didn't move over to Super League, there was some long-standing animosity between some of those people there and some of these people here. And I think some of that had dripped into Souths. I mean, Souths were very vocal about Super League, and those people over there didn't like that. You know, we're talking about Nine and News Limited. I mean, these are, at the time, News Limited's still a huge entity, but they were ginormous entities. And these were the clubs that stayed with the NRL. And I'll be honest with you, I think some of those people there particularly didn't like George and his stance, because George will, as you know, mate, if George has got a stance, he will stand there and he won't let go, and he'll punch on till the end, and you've got to admire the bloke for that. Really, you've got to admire him for that. But I think these people didn't like it. So, of course, they put a criteria assessment together, and we had to go through that.
Bulldogs threw away the leash after the break, and by full time had finished 30-8 winners.
All the way he'll go.
We were playing the Bulldogs at the Sydney Football Stadium, and I was out there in the members' bar with the Lissing brothers, who are non-drinkers, by the way.
I remember clearly looking back at that crowd, thinking of that one day when we knew that we were marked for extinction in 1998. There's Martin, Steve McDermott, and myself, watching ourselves get beaten by Canterbury, people saying you're out of here and so forth, and us talking to the board then, and there were many good people on that board, but there was a feeling of helplessness, and we just looked at each other and said, wow, we've got to do something about this.
We said we'd never forgive ourselves if we didn't try and do something, you know, to help save South Sydney, you know, football was the people's game and South was the people's team. And that's why we thought, well, we'd never be able to look each other in the eye if we didn't attempt to, you know, try and do something, and that's when we started the movement.
I'd had a fair bit to drink that day, and we were sort of talking about how wonderful our supporter base was, but we all seemed to just meet here, there and everywhere, and we had this nucleus of politicians, business people, celebrities that all supported South. And I stupidly said, well, we need to have a meeting, and we need to get some sort of process in place to get these guys involved.
This would have been sort of mid to late 90s. I think the Lissing brothers and Steve McDermott approached me. They were looking for people who had different skills and different connections to come together in a professionally credentialed group to offer what help to the club they could.
This guy, I have never met him. In my whole life, I have never met him, and I had no idea that he was even going to be available to come in here. I only read about him. I don't even know what to say to him when he goes out, but I'm so excited. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. David Bowie. Yeah.
Don Lane, for those of you that don't know, was, at the time, he was the biggest celebrity on television in Australia. He was king of TV and an absolute die-hard South Sydney supporter.
Don was this long, lanky Yank from Brooklyn who came out here and was highly talented, in fact, sang regularly here at the South Sydney Juniors, was a star here. But he fell in love with South almost straight away. He was a baseball nut, and he came here, I think, in the late 60s, at a time when Souths were on top of rugby league. And I think he was won over by it, and everybody loved South and the style of play that they played in those late 60s. So he became as obsessive as any of us when it came to Souths.
I think that's one of the reasons I have a love affair with South Sydney. It's made up of a lot of survivors. Guys who just don't take no for an answer. You know, it's that sort of Australian tenacity which I identify with New York, and there's a feeling there. I've said it many, many times. I feel sorry for people who are not South Sydney fans because they'll never really understand what it's about.
I got to know him pretty well, and he would go and do rev-up speeches to the players at Redfern Oval before a game. There's one famous time where I think playing against Manly, and it was called in to give this inspirational speech, and he took off his Rolex watch that he had and was talking about this and smashed the watch on the ground. I think all the players were highly impressed with this $5,000 or $10,000 watch that was just in smithereens in the bottom there, because Don was trying to emphasise how tough the side had to be against Manly. He used to get upset if there was a Souths game on when he had his Tonight Show on television, and if anyone told him what the score was, he'd just go berserk. He'd just go into another orbit. No, don't tell me.
Through his following of NFL and the basketball in the US, came up with the idea of the Minties jersey being better for the club as far as the look on the field and the sponsorship logos and that type of thing were concerned. Then he also came up with a concept about trying to retire the number 14 jersey for the reserve and actually giving that number 14 jersey to all of the supporters, so the supporters of South Sydney could be the 14th man.
This is not the end, by the way. This is not the last day.
It's the beginning.
We will be there next year.
When we subsequently got together that day at City Football Stadium, we decided that Group 14 was what we'd call ourselves because we were the supporters of South Sydney.
The Group 14 was a gathering of absolute South Sydney nutters. I mean, people who were, like me, born and bred Souths, and believed that we had to do something to improve our chances of winning a premiership. And we were in the doldrums financially, and we couldn't recruit players. We didn't have the money to recruit players. We didn't have the facilities there when rugby league was starting to become professional. We were still, I think, back in the days when it was sort of run by front row forwards. No offence to front row forwards, but it wasn't businesslike.
I was working at Triple J at the time, and we weren't digger mates, but I knew Andrew Denton because Andrew's a legend. And Andrew phoned me up and he said, look, there's this thing called Group 14. He said, which Steve McDermott and the Lissing brothers and Don Lane put together. And he said, it's people in business and in the media who do what they can for the club. He said, would you like to be part of it? And I said, yeah, of course I would. And, I still remember going to the first meeting, and apart from the fact that it was, all these great people, I was still pretty blown out. I was in the same room as Don Lane. Dom's, I'm in my 50s now. Dom was pretty cool when I was growing up. Everyone who was in that Group 14 was not doing it to raise their profile. Everyone was you're a Souths fan first, and then what you brought, whether it was business or politics or media, that came second. You know, the most important thing was, you know, you're a mad Souths fan.
Within a very short time, we met with some really key stakeholders, politicians mainly, and different. George Piggins was there. The juniors was there, was represented by Henry Morris, and we started the ball rolling, and that's how we got involved with Group 14.
Through the right wing, trying to hit down the ground. So Michael Whitney draws blood. Tremendous roar from the crowd. Wow, a clean bowl.
Everybody knew that I was a tragic South supporter. Even though I was a cricketer, everybody knew that I'd played rugby league till I was 20 and I loved it, and that I was a die-hard South Sydney supporter. So I got asked to join Group 14 with all of those people. There needed to be some changes on the board. I say this with respect. Some of the gentlemen that were on the board when I got on the board were very, very old. We could sort of see maybe what was coming, and there needed to be a bit of energy on the board. So I got on the board, and I do remember this clearly. My father passed away when I was 16, and that's where the Rabbitohs thing. My mother was a Paddo girl, so she was a closet Rooster supporter. But the old man, you know, me and my sister, you know, red and green eye. And I wanted to say that night when I got made a board member how proud my dad would have been of me if he was still alive. And I was halfway through this speech and I looked around the table and two of the older gentlemen on the board had nodded off during my speech. So that said to me, we need some new people on the board, because if what we're thinking is going to happen at the end of this year, and we're up for expulsion or however that's going to work, there was talk that a team's going to get punted, we can't have people nodding off in the boardroom.
Ex-sportsmen like Michael Whitney and politicians like Albo and others all decided that we should shake it up, that we should take on the old board and change things. And I was quite happy to join that, and I became part of that Group 14 and we became a new board.
Group 14 started to activate some very heavy hitters, and almost one by one, some of those older gentlemen were replaced by much younger, energetic people. Those gentlemen were still on a board because at the time, the Leagues Club and the Football Club was the same board. And there was a few people in the wings that were saying that shouldn't be like that. So these guys that were removed off the Football Club board were still on the Leagues Club board, and this whole board pretty much changed over the next year, and George would have been the only person left on that board from the original board that I joined.
I had to ask the board to resign, and as I say, a lot of those gentlemen that were on the board at the time were known to me for most of my life, and it was pretty difficult. Without their sacrifices at the time, we wouldn't have got off base number one. So it was a pretty monumental time for those guys.
To go forward, we needed a more professional outlook and business plan. We appointed a new CEO, and a plan was put in place to try and meet this criteria.
And 94.
We did get into trouble in the early 70s. We tried to do a major development, and we went bankrupt, and we've virtually never been able to fully recover from it.
Frank? Right, you're going to give us a big sponsorship?
The board that I've been with for the last 10 years, you know, like keeping this football club alive for the last 10 years has been something of a trick, I'll tell you.
In the end, it's an entertainment game. Rugby league is entertainment for News Limited. That's what it's about. If they see their potential audience being turned against them, that is of threat to them. That is threatening to them as seeing 5 QCs with a strong case in the High Court. Group 14 got together about a year ago to inject some new ideas and energy into the club to help it survive what we realised was going to be a very ugly backlash after Super League. Basically a concerted attempt, we believe, to remove the club from the competition it founded. Well, we'll get what we deserve.
Things became critical when it became clear that Souths were going to be kicked out. And that's when a lot of us stepped up. I was in the media then, so I used my position in the media to talk about it, and I think I probably might have been one of the first people to actually flag what was going to happen some months out before it happened.
Because it was my last year and was always going to be my last year in '99, I made the decision at the start of the year. I was looking at life after football and I wanted to be involved in football administration. So I was actually working part-time at the club while still playing. You know, I thought my best contribution could be in the role of football manager. So I was working around the club and working with the new board and the new administration to learn as much as I could off the field, and I was getting more and more information in terms of the way they were compiling this criteria and where we were sitting and what we need to do, and so I probably knew more than most. It probably wasn't all that helpful to let the team know just where we were at, and so a lot of the players were sort of oblivious. It was particularly hard for the younger players who, you know, were just starting their career, players like Craig Wing, you know, who was a superstar in the making, you know, and had been a South Sydney junior and wanted to play at South all his life. You know, for him to be fully aware, and I still don't think to this day he was fully aware of what was going to happen.
I'll never forget playing against Newcastle, and they had the worst change rooms. There was no hot water in the change rooms after a game. The ground was terrible, and I used to think, well, we play at the footy stadium and we've got that. But Newcastle have got this, but how is Newcastle not in the frame? Anyway.
In order for us to move forward with the upcoming criteria of the NRL, we needed to get a document together. We needed to get that submission put in very quickly because we were running out of time and nothing had been done in order to put that submission forward to the NRL. We were very fortunate that the juniors came on board.
I've been perceived, and I've been belted from here to Laperouse and back, as being the villain by the stance that South Sydney juniors have taken. But our stance has been a responsible one. Last year there was a public spat between the juniors and the seniors, mainly George and myself as both spokespeople. Like in any family, all families have squabbles from time to time, but those squabbles are always sorted out. There was a difference of opinion on the involvement and the strength of the involvement in financial terms that the juniors could support our district club.
The Rabbitohs had no dough. They went to the juniors and said, look, if we want to be here next year and beyond, we're going to need to start to get our act together. Maybe we've fallen behind a little in terms of professional rugby league and where we should be as a club. And so there was a whole lot of money invested in trying to get the club to where we thought it needed to be. We were really in the sights here, and it was going to take a big effort for us not to be eliminated.
We had to go through a really incredible process of filling out that criteria assessment. To do the financials, we got a bloke called John Brown, who was a partner in KPMG. I mean, these guys are heavy hitters in that world. And John was a tragic Rabbitoh, and he said, yeah, I'll come on the board and I'll look after all of that for you. For free! So this was the groundswell of amazing people. I mean, John's just one. Dominic Sullivan was the mayor of Randwick at the time. I'm on. I mean, these people are busy, but they're not that busy that they can't do something when it's a heartfelt thing in their life. And that's why we had so many unbelievable people jump on board to support. People like Alan Jones in the background, Nick Greiner in the background, Mikey Robbins in the background, Deirdre Gruzevin in the background, who ended up on the board.
Well, I was in the Parliament, and I was a Labor member and everything else, and I had this other game to follow, and so you were always busy. I was the only female and everything, but people didn't sort of treat you in a different way. And because I think we just talked as they talked, and no, it didn't worry me at all.
Well, we were a family of 5 kids. We all were involved one way or another in politics. Deirdre ended up in the upper house and then the lower house in New South Wales. I was there for 20 years before that, and then went to Canberra. Anyone who knows Dee knows that she's very passionate. She's a fighter, born fighter. So she was a natural for this.
Unbelievable lady. Oh, never took a backward step. One night in the boardroom, it erupted, and George was going to storm out of the boardroom and just leave us in there. And Deirdre got up and stood at the door like this, and she went, "George, take your seat. Go and take your seat now." And there's this woman who was actually a little taller than George, Deirdre, giving it to him, and George went, oh, and went back and sat down. I said, Deirdre, if that had been one of the blokes standing there, he just would have gone, "Get out of my way," and he would have walked out. But there was Deirdre, and she probably knew at the time that she was the only one that could stand up and stop him from leaving that boardroom, and I'll never forget it. And George, what was George going to say? There was Deirdre there. He went, and then sat down, and then we sorted it out. But, you know, that was only one moment when the board erupted. It didn't erupt often, but there was some heated debates there. And
Deirdre was a powerful person, but a powerful woman. It was really good to have a strong woman, backing us on that one, because clearly women love rugby league as much as men love rugby league, but it tended to be a bloke sport. So to have someone as capable and as powerful as Deirdre Gruisseven supporting us and out there on the front foot was really important. It was important because she brought all the things a woman can bring, but also just an independent spirit can bring. And so she was vital.
If you look up the word matriarch in the dictionary, there's a photograph of Deirdre. So Deirdre was an incredibly tireless worker for the club, passionate supporter of the club, very intelligent, very, very considered, very well thought.
Deirdre always seemed to be this calming influence, and would come up with a statement that everybody would go, oh, yeah, that's sensible. Just a wonderful, wonderful person, great lady.
We're not allowed a product being packaged for television and profit. We're allowed a great tradition and a home for our kids in the future.
If you had to go into a political fight or take someone on, when we needed someone, Deirdre was the one that would front up, and she was amazing. And I've been fortunate in my lifetime to been a friend of Deirdre's for a long, long time, and I'll take that friendship to the grave.
We talk of George and we talk of Nick. Pappas, of course, as being important in the Group 14 and other individuals outside of that who helped. But I think Deirdre was as important as anybody and as game-changing as any of the others. If you're in a war, you want Deirdre on you, beside you in the trenches.
So about 2 years ago, my wife spent some time going to the Gruissevens at the change of seasons to do a photographic book as a present to show Deirdre how much we love her. So yeah, you can say it wasn't like meeting Deirdre Gruisseven, it was like finding, like finding a second family.
She devoted an enormous amount of her time to this struggle, and I think did nothing but work to save the club.
I just did what I was having to do and hoping to do the things that I'm doing are right, that's all. Yeah.
This game was not conceived to be a servant of business, pay television, or faceless administrators. The game belongs to the people. It must be handed back to the people for them to decide who is to run the game.
There is a perception out there that George is the hero of South Sydney. I agree with that. His public image, absolutely outstanding.
His passion was great. I mean, George played the game hard and he played business hard. And there was no compromise with George. And George was a good man for his time. And George was smart enough, when his time came to move on, he moved on. But for the fight, in the trenches, in the dirt, in the slugfest, he was your man.
He became the figurehead, the symbol, the poster boy, if you like, of what South was about. You could count on George being there for the long haul, and he was there for the long haul in this battle where the odds were stacked against us.
One thing Mr Murdoch's got to realise, this is not about big business, this is about sport. And sport belongs to the people. And it belongs to people like you that fight hard for it, and that you've been determined to make sure your side stays in the competition, and we'll make sure it does for you. Thanks very much.
I remember as a player thinking, if we play well, if we make the semis, how can they possibly get rid of us?
One of the most famous clubs of all, South Sydney. 20 premierships. In a battle for survival taken out by their captain, Sean Garlick.
We had the biggest pack in the comp, you know. We had 5 guys that were 6'5", which back in those days was a massive pack.
There were some good players. We had Spud Carroll, we had Chris Caruana, we had a heap of guys. I really felt like we banded together quite well and we were actually playing for something.
1.25 minutes to go. Canterbury by 2. Trindle across the ground. Doonerman, can he pass? Yes, he can. Trindle gets it away. Right wing. He goes into the corner. He's in the corner. What about the pass from Trindle? Well, what an incredible performance this has been. What a game. It's had all of the emotion leading up to it.
We set on a path in '99 that was hopefully going to take us to the finals.